and welcome everyone to the first episode of Women's Health Tech Wednesdays in 2024. I am your host, Nina Joshi. I would like to formally bring on our guest for today, Emilia Kruzel, who works as a director for strategy and partnerships at Propeller Health. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. And hi to everyone there. Thanks for joining. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Would maybe love to kick things off, Emilia, by having you share a little bit more of a background on yourself, an introduction, just so we can get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, thanks. I come to you right now from Propeller Health within our business development function for life sciences specifically. We'll talk a lot about that today, I think. And we're a wholly owned subsidiary of ResMed, which is sort of well known in the respiratory care space, CPAPs, ventilators. But Propeller Health is sort of a digital health incubator inside of ResMed, and we make a precision digital health platform designed to aid patients, caregivers, and providers to improve outcomes in chronic diseases. We're also well known for sort of custom hardware, and I have some props here, sensors that sit on top of inhalers and medications. And you can imagine what tracking digitally medicine intake can do for care, right? That data plus the patient user experience can create a really robust set of chronic care management tools, sort of previously sort of unused and unlocking a lot of interesting features there. From there, we're also sort of developing combination products with our life science partners where the electronics are embedded inside, maybe a dosing regime or a medication delivery device. And so that you can imagine there's a lot of interesting regulatory features there and other things that we get involved with on the partnership and business development side. If I go back further, and you might be able to hear it in my voice, I'm a scientist by training. I did over a decade of preclinical research on the molecular basis of infectious diseases of the developing world. So that's molecular biology, biochemistry. And after that, when I got into industry, I actually worked within remote data capture solutions for clinical trials, where I started to learn about how digital and wearables and sensors can really improve not only drug development, but could unlock more across care. And that was sort of how I got in from the biology side to the technology and software side. And I found sort of a home sitting in between those two at Propeller Health, where we're bringing digital solutions to actual care and medications as they're delivered in the real world.
That is incredible. And I would love if you could just share a little bit more. I know you kind of touched upon really the innovation. And I think chronic care definitely is like the use case oftentimes for so much innovation. And would love to learn a little bit more about, the integration between these digital health solutions, pharmaceuticals. How can this kind of marriage between the two really come together to address the challenges in chronic care, specifically considering how it needs to exist within, right, this existing pharmaceutical industry and all of its own quirks that it has? Would love if you could shed some insight onto that.
Yeah, I think you're totally right about the chronic care aspect, right? You have a set of patients that are on medication regimes that are maybe daily, maybe monthly, often in combination with other things. And then you have this longitudinal aspect, right, where they may be changing treatments over time. But the medication, when they get it, is sort of a point solution, right? It's a product, it comes home with them. And as maybe the doctor or the pharmacist or even the pharmaceutical company, right? They lose touch with these patients during these long periods of time in between maybe visits or exacerbations, right? And you don't want to only see your patients or know about them when they're having a really bad event. And this is where digital can kind of bring care into the home. And I've heard some of your previous speakers talk about that idea, right? How do you get something closer to patients in their hands or the caregivers that sort of makes their own management easier? They can learn more. They're not only relying on those sort of infrequent doctor visits to get more education about what other things they could be doing. A great example from Propeller, right? If we put a little sensor on your rescue medication, your reliever or albuterol, if people in the audience know about that, we can track sort of when you're using it, how frequently, and where you are, and sort of develop trends about maybe it's coordinated with some kind of pollen season or other environmental exposure. And we use sort of rules engines to sort of train our own software about you as a person. And how does that change your behaviors? And a lot of certain diseases are trigger avoidances or knowing what they are, finding what are those things. And people's bodies and physiologies change over time, right? And that's hard to monitor from inside your own head too. And these objective data feeds can really, I think, unlock care in a way that doesn't actually add steps. It is, of course, an additional thing to your care, but it takes away some of the uncertainty, some of the stress, and can unlock more objective database conversations between patients and their caregivers or their doctors, pharmacists, whoever kind of is getting that data feed. besides themselves. So I think that's a place where chronic care, you have this longitudinal ability to kind of iterate, learn. Of course, like the more data you have, the more informed clinical decision-making can be. And I think we know from, I don't love the term consumers, but patients, right? They are often unsatisfied with their care. They're not sure, they're not experts, right? They're just themselves. They can be distrusting if they've had a bad experience with medications or with maybe a care entity, nothing's perfect. And but they have an entire lived experience that's an N of, 1 for themselves. They're going to judge based on that. But we also know that from sort of surveys that patients think the industry has a responsibility back to them, right? These drugs can be very costly. Doctor visits are very costly, to prove out those outcomes and not just deliver them products and services that may not be working. And we also see there's appetite on the doctor's side. They want more information. They want to be able to prioritize patients, use their time wisely on the most maybe severe cases or someone who's having an issue, and the data can do just that as well. So we see a lot of value to the entire care ecosystem in digitizing some of these steps or processes and data feeds, and getting those data to the folks who can use it, from the right patient at the right time. We see can relieve burden. Of course, there's some steps to get it developed and implemented, but I think there's a lot of promise, especially in chronic care. That's what we've seen, really positive outcomes in the research we've done on Propeller devices and solutions.
That is amazing. There's so many, oh wow, there's so many things that I want to go into.
Too much, I'm sorry.
No, this was incredible. Number one, I loved that you were really articulating this broader ecosystem and how all of these inputs are able to feed and kind of benefit each other, from the patient to, the family, the provider, et cetera. And I also really love that you're kind of calling out the caregiver, because I think that's also a part of, the patient support system. They're kind of folded into it. And the fact that, Propeller Health is thinking about, the role of the caregiver, I think is so important. And then lastly, also wanted to touch on, I think, what you were really articulating around a patient's lived experiences and thinking about it from outcomes and diagnoses for you. And you were touching upon this, but would love to just learn more for kind of the incorporation of these digital components, for chronic care management, and even thinking about digital therapeutics. How can that kind of contribute to outcomes and also diagnosis? And I like that you were really articulating lived experiences, and there's been a historical neglect of a woman's ability to report pain. We've seen a lot of these cultural kind of things that could be barriers. So would love to learn a little bit more about that too.
Yeah, I think some of the design features, the sort of, I think one of the places where digital health can really synergize with some other disciplines is around psychometrics, cognitive behavioral science, kind of creating a system of data intake that can remove some of those biases that individual humans might have in assessing another patient or something else, right? And therefore, we're not imposing a rules based on what maybe gender identity or expression you've told us, but rather what are the data telling the engine about what you're saying, right? And taking that at 100% as opposed to interpreting it some other way. And this is a challenging space, right? Designing software that can be even more sophisticated in assessing psychology, plus maybe physiological symptoms, plus medication inputs, right? That's the place where I see a lot of potential, but it's there's going to be a lot of research and development that's going to have to go into these to be very sophisticated enough to do that, where you're not treating someone based on maybe a demographic profile, but their individual profile. There are some places that are unlocking sort of the molecular physiology, genetic components as well, so that it isn't sort of just a matter of maybe what sort of bin you fall into, right? But what is your suite of inputs saying about you and your condition over time? And I think the monitoring more continuously is going to be a really important piece of how we define those categories, and then the responses that maybe the tool or the medicine or the care provider can do. And I think a good example that's become almost standard of care is the diabetes space, right? Where folks are used to kind of capturing inputs, capturing their responses digitally, right? The glucose levels, other things, and then also adjusting their medication appropriately in real time, right? This is now happening on the day-to-day basis in diabetes space. And I almost think we could think of a lot of chronic conditions like this chemotherapy, oncology treatments where there's a lot of maybe side effects or symptomology that may be individual specific. I think there's a lot of places for that. I think you touched on sort of maybe femtech, but like fertility, family planning, pregnancy, postpartum. I think there's a lot of places where you have really engaged patients that just don't have enough info or guidance in that moment-to-moment basis where the anxiety load gets higher and higher the longer you go without sort of some info. And I think digital solutions that are companions to those folks during these times of maybe higher engagement and care because of something that's going on in your life can really unlock some great potential. I think, we're kind of at this point of, there was this digital health boom with a lot of promise and a lot of maybe piloting, testing, iteration. And I think we still are in that stage of testing a lot of things, fine tuning them. We need market feedback because of commercial models, of course, are going to constrain what can get to consumers. But I think we have to stay kind of energetic as a digital health system of, the problem space has not been fully sort of tested and probed yet, nor has the solution space. And we have to keep maintaining that rigor because adoption will only come once they are seamless, right? And scale will after that. But I think some of those places where medications are really expensive, treatment regimes are complicated, side effects may be very high, are places that are probably lower hanging fruit than others, just to kind of get that feedback and see what works for those types of therapeutic areas and conditions. And now I've gone way probably off of what your question was, but
no, this is so
kind of mind.
Well, actually, it was 100% on topic, and it also led me to another question. So perfect. I think we hear this a lot, right? Like personalization of care and what that can mean. And I think really what you're articulating is seeing that in practice and how it's not just this buzzword, something that's in the future, but something that actually, can be done right now, that's happening. And I think thinking about really the need for the personalization, but just enhancing patient experience. I'm kind of curious to get your take. I think when we think about chronic conditions and specifically within just this pharmaceutical landscape, how can having some of these, digital components or some of these other technological features really enhance, I think, just the broader patient experience? And I would imagine by doing that can just contribute to efficacy outcomes of treatment plans. I'm sure there's so many great downstream effects of that. But have you just kind of in the work that you do right now, have you kind of seen what that looks like to have a amazing patient experience and have that translate to outcomes?
Yeah, I think you're touching on the sort of the value proposition we have, right? Is there's a lot of folks talking about patient centricity and what does that mean when you're developing a product or a solution? And I think a pharmaceutical is a great example because pharmaceutical companies are sort of in the product business, right? They put a product that goes on the shelf, it goes home, and ideally it does something. But due to sort of the macroeconomic things, the pricing of drugs, the way insurers are reacting, insurers are starting to say, oh, no, we'll pay you for that drug when it works, when that patient gets better, right? And not just the fact that it was maybe dispensed.
Right.
So that's a patient-centric business model. But then how if you're pharma, how do you sort of solve that? How do you get to that patient and make sure that they're kind of taking it as prescribed, that they're getting the wraparound care that's part of, maybe that drug's outcomes are, not just you at home doing it, but the entire sort of suite of your experience. And I think that shifting the mindset a little bit, as opposed to just the pharmaceutical product, but a solution that goes into the market from the pharmaceutical manufacturer, is how we often think about connected drug systems, digital companions, and digital therapeutics. So now by creating a digital experience, now you have maybe, in-home, not access, but information to that patient, support. It's almost like expanding their current patient support programs to include data feeds, bidirectional communication, info to the providers. And then you have sort of more robust data that will show outcomes to the payer if that's sort of maybe a challenge for the pharmaceutical company, right? So instead of just delivering a product, deliver a solution to that patient that has that indication beyond just maybe what's ingested or what's sort of injected, right? I think there's a lot of wraparound services that right now we might think of as sort of white glove, very, exuberant, but I think my thinking has evolved to this should become more normalized, right? It should be part of the experience because again, the information delta between that patient and the person developing the drug and releasing it to market is huge.
Mhm.
And patients are expecting that. We also know that things that benefit the doctor, like the doctor is more likely to prescribe a drug that is more patient-centric, that has that program or experience. So it's good for pharma in that way. Formularies are going to be very conscious of which drugs have those outcomes in the real world, not just in the clinical trial. So it's also good for pharma that way, right? I think adjusting the idea of what a drug can and should be beyond just the pill, I think is really important as pharmaceuticals now are evolving from small molecules, chemicals, to these sort of complex delivery mechanisms and solutions where you have injectables, biomolecules, antibodies, infusions are, now more and more common, gene-based therapeutics, right? These are all now things that are harder to deliver. They're more specialized. They're harder to develop. And they're also just like harder to get in the hands of the patient. So they're also becoming very expensive, right? These sort of specialty medications are at a higher price point. And so I think the solution that goes alongside, I don't want to say services, but how that is delivered through the care pathway can also elevate with the sophistication of the therapy. And I think that's where we are. And I think digital partners are a crucial way for pharma to do this because, developing it in-house is certainly one way to go. But if we want pharma to work on what they know best and what they're best in, what their systems are developed to do, this is really outside, the wheelhouse. I've met with, some of our customers, right, trying to incorporate electronics into their device teams. They don't have folks that do electrical engineering or, right, it's just not a standard suite of skills. And so I would encourage pharma folks to look outside, and not just to Propeller. There's a robust digital health teams that can kind of help you through some of those questions. How do you do an FDA interaction when you have electronics? These are places where the partnership can be really, really crucial and like the third leg of the stool for getting something where it's in a place where it can be tested, developed, and labeled and go to market. So that's kind of how we think about it at Propeller, getting digital to improve chronic care through the pharmaceutical pathway, I think is a really good one that is, deserves some more, I think, investment, iteration, and market validation.
100%. And I really love kind of thinking about the paradigm shift about not just like a pill that exists, but really just the broader landscape and how exactly are patients interacting with all of these different things. And I think on that note, really kind of curious, when we're thinking about, and you'd mentioned like these specialty, medications, there's so many amazing things that are kind of coming to market within kind of the current ecosystem as it stands and kind of the current like payment model as it stands. Are there any innovative commercial models that you've seen that kind of can be employed to bring some of these things to market just with the existing, fund, regulatory, and compliance things that we all love?
Yeah, I think the commercial models, we have to be creative right now because we are at the spot where not all digital solutions are covered by, let's say, insurance. And, in the US, that means something. And in other markets, it means something different, right? So the working sort of in a cross-industry way to create the frameworks where insurers know the value of these things, the outcomes they deliver, and having I would say more open mind about, especially in these specialty places, what might be a useful care tool. I also think that sort of the big hospitals, integrated delivery networks, they have some challenges with upfront costs to implement digital solutions as opposed to the long-term value, right? I think that shift to value, I think, is a good one. But the other place where I think we see some innovation in models is like, right, what should come with the pharmaceutical and what might come from a different sponsorship. And something that's been making itself evident in the market recently is that when pharmaceutical companies sort of deliver this alongside the drug, that's sort of a seamless experience in certain ways for a connected drug delivery experience or digital companion. But the ROI for that pharmaceutical program is actually really good. They actually see benefits on adherence to therapy over time. Persistence goes up if they have this sort of digital companion with them. Provider preference, consumer preference. So the kind of the base indicators for pharma suggest that they could be investing a lot more and actually, reaping the benefits of a a more holistic solution delivered to patients that they're more satisfied with, but it also seems to check out in terms of the revenue numbers as well. So that's a model that I think over a longer term period, of course, we got to be thinking long term when we're thinking about digital. It can't just be like a flash in the pan. This fiscal year, we're going to innovate. It needs to be incorporated, I think, it's a core portfolio strategy, like their drugs, right? Their drugs are on a 10 to 15 year plan,
Absolutely.
developed and go to market. And I don't see in a lot of biotech pipelines, I think we start to see some digital products inside their 5-10 year plans. But for these top 10 pharmas where they could really put some, I think, heft and innovation behind it, that's the place where I would love to see innovation in their business models too, right? How much is digital core to their portfolio, as opposed to maybe an add-on or something else. And likewise for, I'm speaking to pharma because that's the area I know better, but I think likewise for payers, hospitals could be innovating in this way, right? Seeing a longer term lens with a value and outcomes-based metric can really, I think, incentivize an acceleration some of these things. And of course, we need some people who are willing to be risk takers, right? Like this is digital health, we've got to try things. I think that's one constraint, of course, right? Once you've gone through a regulatory path, changes means something different than if I were to change something in the commercial consumer space.
Right.
But at the same time, we've got to educate our regulators, talk about what these solutions can do and how they might evolve over time. And it won't happen unless we kind of do it. So that's sort of what my thinking on the commercial space. It's the most elegant solution is probably gonna be it's gonna have to be very challenged to develop something that's elegant, sophisticated, really well thought out in terms of not only what it does in front of the user, but how it gets implemented through the care pathway and who's the stakeholders that are sort of decision makers or influencers that can make it more successful. And I think this, the siloed nature of healthcare creates that challenge for digital, but I think the more players who are involved in pushing for it will unlock, I think, some of those over time. We have seen international markets developing frameworks for digital therapeutics right on formularies, national payers. Germany, I think, is an example. Others that are even just creating public awareness that this will be a thing. They don't know how to do it quite yet. And those are the places where, the first sort of tests and things like that will flesh out a bit more. But we do have to be creative in commercial models. And I think, speaking as someone who's worked in this now for 5 years or so, the digital space, we're certainly open to really creative strategies. We can work around other entities that may not have as much flexibility. And I think, those large corporations should take advantage of digital teams that can kind of support them in something novel and create those partnerships.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's nice that you're kind of really talking about how at this point it's so much of it is sowing the seeds. Like, how can we just start to think about it in this particular way, and how that can really set us on the right track to have this longitudinal view of what this could mean on a much larger context. So I think that framework is really, really important. So I love that you brought that up.
We're certainly creating the market as we're going to market with a lot of these things.
Yeah, definitely.
And due to pharmaceuticals themselves are bespoke, right? They were developed by a single entity. The wraparound thing will likely be bespoke as well. And that's its own market in and of itself too, right? So it's a lot of novelty, but I think there are best practices and of course a lot of know-how that could make those things more successful given what we've already seen in the market and in research and development so far.
100%. I have so many more questions for you, but I do want to just seed in some questions that we have from the audience. So we have a participant asking, can Propeller connect chronic care patients to clinical research studies to get more participation in clinical trials and improve chronic care delivery of solutions?
I mean, the short answer is yes. I think, this is all a matter of what is sort of the digital health entity's relationship to that patient, not to get too in the weeds, but permission structures, data sharing agreements, all those things. Do they opt in to being sort of recruited or talked to? And I think this is an area where folks involved in chronic care can actually help. We have such a good relationship with our patients that are on Propeller, a lot of trust, a lot of sort of, we know a lot of private things about them, right? Not in a weird way, but in a way that helps them treat their asthma or their COPD. And I think it's a good place to engage with them in clinical trials because it can help get over that hurdle of maybe distrust or a misunderstanding of information. So the sort of digital companion as a trusted advisor can, I think, open up some doors there. And I know there are some places that are specializing in this more community building with an idea of recruitment. So I guess yes and yes is my answer to that one.
The power of digital, I think, and being able to have all of this, it really does kind of open doors in all of these other aspects. So I think that's just really cool to see. And I kind of wanted to ask you too, I know as you're really thinking about, Propeller Health and just all of the innovation that's happening when we think about the chronic condition space. And I would imagine that not only, your experience as working in business development, but also just from research, are there, as you've kind of seen these industries like live and breathe and exist, are there any specific challenges or opportunities that arise when you really start to kind of incorporate a lot of these digital technologies with pharma? And we could kind of speak within the realm of chronic care, but if there's any, folks on the call that are, founders that are kind of working on med tech or digital therapeutics, any kind of lessons learned or just specific challenges, things that, you can kind of impart. It looks like, oh no, it looks like Emilia had, oh, I think you're back on. We can see, but we can't hear you. I think you're on mute.
Thank
Perfect.
you. So sorry. I think I had a little glitch in my Wi-Fi.
No problem. That's what happens.
Thank you for being patient.
Yeah, of course. Well, Amelia, I do realize that we're at time. So
Yes.
I wanted to, I know there's so much more that we want to get into. But something that I was kind of seeing in the chat was really conversation around like data and data privacy, especially with, so much technology and just this constant stream of information. Do you have any specific thoughts on, where we see that going as just like another consideration that comes with just tech and innovation in general?
Yeah, I mean, it's in the air we breathe as a digital health company, right? Being good data stewards, compliant to HIPAA, GDPR, really robust security features, all those things you just gotta do. But this idea of putting the patient at the center of their own data, right? And that being a guiding principle on where the value should be unlocked, right? It's like they should be able to bring it wherever they're getting care. That that we've got to create that opportunity where we resist, as I think commercial entities, thinking of that data as something that's maybe for resale or others. It's really to unlock care. That's how I think about it. No, there's of course a lot of lift to maintain those compliances, but I would say without it, we're not going to get the trust of our consumers and doctors. So I think that will, stay. And I think GDPR created a sort of a tip of the spear in putting the person who's that data is about at the center of owning it. And, using that in principles, but we always have to have really strong sort of data partnering, call it out up front. We have these hard discussions with our partners, like who owns what data, where does it go? So I would just encourage folks, like, if you're working in the business side of this, you just got to address it head on, have really good SMEs in your corner. That's what I do, bring them and make sure that it's properly stewarded and properly stored and all those things, and that the folks who created it can use it to their own benefit.
I love that. Oh, what a beautiful way to end. Thank you so much I think that was amazing. And really just such an insightful conversation. This really was such an amazing way to kind of kick off the year of Women's Health Tech Wednesday. So thank you, Emilia, for such an amazing conversation.
Oh, thank you. It was a real joy to speak with you. So thanks for hosting these. I love them.